Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. Glad you guys are with me today. Hey, and right off the top, I want to thank some new listeners we got. Miss Teresa Rowland, Michael Hall. I got some nice comments and messages from you guys, and appreciate you guys listening. And the podcast is growing. 2025 was pretty nuts, and 2026 is only getting bigger and better. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to all the big events this spring. Actually, I got an event at Cincinnati middle of this month, March 20th, I believe, 21st, 22nd. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday event. Horror Hound, huge horror convention in Cincinnati. I was there last year. I had a booth. I was selling my books, and this guy walks up, and I said, "Hey, where are you from?" He goes, "Well, I'm from Los Angeles." So I started talking to the guy. I said, "What's your name, man?" He's like, "I'm Fetty." I was talking to Fetty Alvarez, the director of Aliens Romulus. Had no idea. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of big names show up at these shows. Last year, or actually this spring, Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard, the guys from Scream, they'll be there signing autographs, meeting fans, taking pictures, kissing babies, and all that good stuff. But yeah, come on out to Cincinnati. I'll be there at Horror Hound. It's going to be a big show. So today, I kind of wanted to touch on Atlanta. I grew up in Nashville. So up until, I guess, the late 90s, there's no pro football team in Nashville. I had the Vanderbilt Commodores, which, that was, I went to games, but it was pretty slim pickings there. Wasn't a lot of wins till Jay Cutler got there for a few years. But so if I wanted to watch pro football, I had to go to Atlanta, maybe Cincinnati. But it seemed like Atlanta was closer, so I'd go watch Falcons from time to time. Spent a lot of time in Atlanta. I probably went to half a dozen games when I was a teenager. But I fell in love with Atlanta. There's just so much, compared to Nashville, it was a huge city. Nashville's grown a whole lot. But, to me, in my head, Atlanta's always kind of like, the biggest city in the South. But, yeah, I used to love going down there and watching the Falcons. Go see the Braves occasionally. Never was a Braves fan, but I'd still love watching live baseball. So but when I went to Atlanta, I always went to the Varsity. Those chili cheese dogs, man, change your life. I couldn't eat them every day, but like once or twice a year, man, those are just, that's the gold standard for fast food. But anyway, getting back to Atlanta, since I've been doing the ghost stories and the folklore, I've wanted to do an Atlanta book. And I've done some research. I've been down there a few times trying to dig in. And Atlanta is kind of like Nashville. The Civil War, you never even know they fought down there. Kennesaw, a little bit north of Atlanta, they got the monuments and preserved the battlefield there. But downtown Atlanta, you never even know the Union was there. I think there's a few historical markers, but it's all developed. Nashville did the same thing. Atlanta's so valuable, in this big metropolitan city. You're not going to put a park there, where they fought. They're just going to build a condo or a big building. So that's kind of what Atlanta did. It's what Nashville did. A lot of big cities did. So, but nevertheless, I have done some digging. I found some fun Atlanta stories. The book's probably going to take a while, but I want to talk today about Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta because it's such an important part of Atlanta history and folklore, and there's some weird, wild stuff there. So let's get started. Atlanta, it's a city that loves to reinvent itself. It's all glass, steel, and New South ambition. But if you head down to the corner of Memorial Drive and Boulevard, you hit a wall. It's a massive red brick Victorian boundary that looks like it's holding back a different century. Behind that wall is 48 acres, the most crowded real estate in Georgia. And this is Oakland Cemetery. But before that, it was the Marble City of Silence. It was just a quiet country plot. But that all changed in 1857. As Atlanta exploded, the dead were in the way. They started digging up bodies from downtown under the old governor's mansion on Kane Street along Peachtree, and they carted them out there. And today, we're talking about what happens when you disturb the dirt. We're talking about the strangers, the body snatchers, and the ghosts that aren't really ghosts. But there might just be some there. You never know. So Oakland Cemetery, it's a mirror. Whenever you were in life, that's what you were in death. You got the towering spires for the mayors and the governors. There's 6 governors and 23 mayors that are buried there in Oakland Cemetery, to be exact. But then there's a stranger section. In the late 19th century, if you were just passing through Atlanta, maybe a rail worker, a drifter, or someone who had fled Athens or another city where there's yellow fever or cholera or something, and you wound up in Atlanta and you died there, well, you were buried there in Oakland Cemetery, but your grave, it wasn't marked with marble. It was a wooden board that just said, stranger. Think about that. No name, no beloved son, no beloved father, just a label that says you didn't belong. And then there's the Fair Street side. This is for the paupers and the slaves. In 1866, the city actually exhumed many of the bodies to be moved them over to Southview, the quote-unquote colored cemetery there in Atlanta. The soil at Oakland has been turned over so many times, it's a wonder anything stays down. Take Jasper Smith. He's the guy in the stone chair by the gate. Jasper, he was a piece of work. He had a mausoleum built years before he died, and he used to go sit in it and watch funeral processions. He famously refused to pay the sculptor because they carved a necktie on a statue. Jasper hated ties. He lived his life, he never wore one, and he wasn't going to spend eternity in one. Well, he won the battle with the sculptor. The tie, it was removed. But strangely, after he died, an ivy vine grew around the statue's neck like a noose. Some call it irony. Some said it was a curse. So we got to stop here and look at the calendar. July 22nd, 1864. In the morning, Oakland was a cemetery. But by noon, it was a fortress. And you have to visualize the geography there. Atlanta, it wasn't the skyline we see now. It was a series of red dirt hills and dense thickets. Oakland sat on one of the highest points on the city's eastern edge. So in military terms, that's the high ground. And in 1864, if you held the high ground, you pretty much held the keys to the city. The air that July morning, it wasn't filled with birds singing. It was filled with iron rain. We're talking about 12-pounder Napoleons and Parrott rifles. Cannons didn't just fire balls, but canister shot. Imagine a giant shotgun shell filled with iron balls the size of marbles, tearing through oak trees and shattering the very headstones we see today. And right next door was a Schofield rolling mill. This wasn't some quiet local business. It was a massive ironworks, the industrial heart of the Confederacy in the Deep South. It was a hive of frantic, sweaty activity. Men were desperately trying to move machinery and iron under a hail of Union shells. Because the mill was such a high-value target, the Union pushed toward it with everything they had. And where did the Confederate line break? Right through the gates of Oakland. And this wasn't a gentleman's war here. This was trench warfare before the world really knew what that meant. Soldiers weren't hiding behind trees. They were crouching behind the brick vaults of Atlanta's founding families. Imagine being a soldier, maybe 18, 19 years old, pressed against the cold marble of a stranger's tomb, while the air above you is whipped into a frenzy by mini balls. The city of the dead was suddenly the only thing keeping you from joining them. And there's a story of Captain Michael Allison. And I want to sit with the timeline for a minute. At 10 o'clock that morning, the sun is high. Allison, he's in the 18th Texas. He's survived the campaign so far, and he gets word. He's been promoted to captain. And it's one of the proudest moments of his life. He's likely thinking about writing home, about the new bars on his collar, about the men he's now responsible for. Well, by 3 o'clock, the Texas Brigade is chewed up in the assault. The heat's 90 degrees. The humidity is stifling, and the smoke from the black powder is so thick you can't see 5 feet in front of your face. Somewhere in that chaos, Allison gets hit. He's dead before his new rank is even dry on the official paperwork. When you walk the Confederate section today, you're walking over 1,000, 1,500 stories just like his. Most of the men didn't die at Oakland. They were brought here from the death houses, the field hospitals, that were located near the medical college and Grady Hospital. They were dug up from the red clay of the Georgia hillsides and reinterred there in Oakland Cemetery in 1866. And that's why people talk about the roll call. When you have 1,500 men who were killed in a panic, buried in a haste, and then dug up and moved years later, that's the recipe for a haunting. The legend says that at night, the Texas captain or another officer stands near the lion of the Confederacy monument. He calls out a name, and from the rows of small square markers, a faint, gravelly voice answers, "Present." It's not just a ghost story. It's a city refusing to forget that its foundation is built on the blood of men who died 5 hours after their finest hour. But not everyone who spent their nights at Oakland believed in the roll call. In 1915, there was a police officer named J.H. Houghton. He was a skeptic. He called the ghost bogies. On his third night, he saw a woman in black, and her eyes were sparkling through a veil. He's so terrified he refused to investigate. Well, the next day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in broad daylight, he goes back to the spot. And what he found was a 5-foot cedar tree. The sparkling eyes were just moonlight on the needles. Well, later that day, he was walking out of the office in a dark form, roughly the same height as him. It walked right in front of him. So Officer Houghton, he's a police officer. He stopped to collect his thoughts, and exactly at the same time, the black form stopped too. Houghton decided to go ahead and follow this black form because it might be leading to something. The pair walked for a while until the ghost head disappeared. Houghton looked up and saw a streetlight on Decatur Street and realized the black shadow was actually his shadow, caused by the new streetlight. Houghton often saw lights bouncing around the cemetery, but often blamed them on headlights of automobiles, reflecting off tombstones as he rounded the hill next to the cemetery. In the early 20th century, there was a watchman who was fearless, and it became a constant joke with him and his friends about sneaking into the cemetery. They would sneak into the cemetery wearing sheets dressed like a ghost to scare him. It never worked, and some of them wound up almost getting shot after sneaking up on him in the pitch-black cemetery. One night the watchman was walking through the burial ground, and he began to hear a very low moaning sound. He followed it until he found where it was coming from. It was coming from a grave with a giant headstone. And as he got closer, he tripped, and as he fell to the ground, he felt something bite him on his ankle. At that moment, he saw something white dart away from him, and he became convinced he was bitten by a ghost. After he gathered himself, he began to investigate. And what he found was a litter of puppies behind the headstone, and that white object that bit him, it was the mother of the puppies trying to protect them. The watchman moved the dogs to a safer place in the cemetery. The next morning, they found the dog's owner, and he gave one of the little puppies to the watchman as a gift. The watchman named the puppy Graveyard, and he began to bring him on patrol with him. So, the lady most synonymous with Oakland Cemetery, it was Ida Borders. She was a secretary there from 1914 to 1934. They called her Aunt Ida. She spent many hours alone in her office over the years, but didn't believe the cemetery was haunted. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she was petrified of thunder and lightning. In order to escape the storm, she would lock herself in the vault under her office, where dozens of cadavers were stored awaiting burial. One year on Christmas Eve, Ida was putting out candles on the graves for a prominent Atlanta family. And then one year, she forgot to blow them out. Around midnight, she woke up and realized, hey, I got to blow these candles out that I lit for the family at the cemetery. Well, when she got to the cemetery, she found the gates were locked and the watchman had gone home to get something to eat. So she went to another part of the cemetery where the walls weren't so high and climbed over. She went back to her office, got the candles, and she put them out. So the next time she saw the watchman, he told her when he came back from his break that, that eerie part of the cemetery was glowing, and he didn't know what had happened. So he was convinced that a ghost had put those out, and it's just kind of like she later told him that it was her, but still it's kind of silly. Well, something else I found in my research: Thomas Nixon was a gravedigger at Oakland Cemetery, and he was summoned to the cemetery in the early 20th century to bury a young man who had recently passed away. Well, when the wagon arrived at the cemetery carrying the body, he and another grave digger went to pick it up and struggled picking up the coffin. As the two men slowly carried the heavy coffin to the grave they had dug earlier in the day, Nixon's curiosity got the best of him. He just knew the remains of the man he had carried had to weigh 300 or 350 pounds. Well, when he and the other grave digger put the coffin down, they opened the lid and found the coffin was filled with bags of sand. The undertaker had taken the body and sold it to a local medical school. And if you want to hear about grave robbing, I've talked extensively about grave robbing. It was a thing. These colleges had to have cadavers, and they would sell them to the colleges. So, probably my favorite story about Oakland Cemetery, and happened back in it was the 1890s. There were a group of men in a saloon, and they dared, after a night of drinking, they dared a friend to go, hey, go to Oakland and steal a headstone. So the guy was drunk. He's brave. He does it. He goes to Oakland, and he steals a headstone. But his conscience gets the best of him. He decides, hey, I need to take this back. There's a grieving family for this individual. I got to take this grave marker back. So one night, he sneaks back into Oakland with the headstone, and he's scared to death. So he quickly runs over to the plot where he got it, and he started hammering the marker back into the ground. Well, in the dark, he accidentally hammered his own long coat into the soil with it. When he tried to stand up, the coat yanks him back. He thinks the dead have reached up and grabbed him. He collapsed, cracked his skull on the grave marker, and bled out there in the cemetery. The next day, a judge was walking through the burying ground and found the young man. It was a sensational story that people talked about for months all over Atlanta. So next time you pass that brick wall on Memorial Drive, look at the shadows. And maybe don't wear a long coat, especially if you plan on stealing a grave marker. So yeah, I love Atlanta. I will get an Atlanta book done at some point. I've got a lot of notes. Like I said, it's hard finding stories there. There was one really wild story. I think it was the largest hotel fire in America. The Winecoff caught fire and killed dozens, not hundreds of people. And today it's still there, but it's another hotel. It's like I can't remember what it's called, but it's right there in the heart of downtown Atlanta, and there's ghost stories all in that building. So, I don't have an Atlanta book, but I do have a Georgia book. I have a book about Savannah, Southern Ghost Stories Savannah, and I've talked about it extensively. I love Savannah, Georgia. So, I can't get you an Atlanta book, but I do have a Savannah book. So if you want some ghost stories from Georgia, check out Southern Ghost Stories Savannah. I've had experiences there, and there's so much history. The Sorrel Weed House. My wife and I had an experience. I've talked about it before, but yeah, we were in supposedly Sorrel. He was a cotton factor, and he had an enslaved woman living in one of the outbuildings behind the house. And according to legend, he was fooling around with her, and his wife found out and committed suicide. Well, he went up and he killed the slave. So that's the story there. Well, my wife and I were up in the top of the house there, or the outbuilding where Molly lived, the slave. And I said, does anybody want to talk to us? And all of a sudden, my phone just freezes, like little squiggly lines. I've had an iPhone since it came out, so I have one today. It's never happened except for that one spot there at the Sorrel Weed House in Savannah, Georgia. So, yeah, there's all kinds of history in Savannah, Atlanta. I love Georgia. I remember last time I was in Savannah, I was actually wrapping up the book. I went down there, it was in August, and it was like 2 years ago. And I was walking around down there by the river taking pictures. And I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I wanted to get out there, get some good shots before people started mingling around. And I had to change 3 times. I was sweating so bad. The humidity is just unbearable in Savannah. But yeah, there's so much history. And there's like a dozen ghost tour companies in Savannah because all the history there, it was a colony. They've all part of the American Revolution in Savannah. But anyway, as we're wrapping up, check out the books. All my books are on Amazon. Some stores carry them. So if you go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, you can ask. Some stores have them, some stores don't, but they can order them for you. But yeah, just go to Amazon, type in Southern Ghost Stories, type in Alan Searcy. Do a book coming out April 30th, Pistols at Red River, the Andrew Jackson Doolan story. I'm excited about that one. So yeah, I'll check back with you guys on Friday. Please leave a review. Send me some questions. Plan on doing a Q&A. May do it Friday. May do it next week. I got a bunch of questions I have to go through. So I'll see you guys on Friday.